Start with a little talk.
You want to talk?
Yeah.
One of the key elements of successful yoga, and one of the surprising elements of successful yoga, is the discovery that everything is inside you. The world exists inside of you. All the dimensions exist inside of you. You are vast and infinite and bigger than everything, anything, and you contain it all. This is discovered in yoga very explicitly, very obviously and self-verifyingly. What was that for a talk? To the point, succinct, and powerful.
But was it true?
Well, truth can't be said, but it's pretty true.
True as it gets.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So we seem to be closing this off by, well, not to,
Yeah, it's pretty true.
oh, sorry. By believing, well, it has to happen somewhere along the way, because we're certainly not born the way we are now. But it seems like there are beliefs that shrink that vastness down to what goes through your head, interpretations, right? Language that you buy into every time something goes through your head.
Sure.
It's creating an alternate universe that's so much smaller. It's separate from this whole.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all beliefs that limit us, that censor it, that make it seem other than the way it actually is.
But when it's corroborated by evidence of ineffectualness, inabilities, the list goes on, then one is apt to believe in one's experience.
Well, it's essential to believe in experience. The problem is we don't believe in experience. We believe in interpretations and stories and narrations about descriptions about what experience is. Experience itself is indescribable. And these descriptions and interpretations are not corroborated by anything. They're only corroborated by repetition of other seeming information sources that claim to be spouting the same thing. But there's no experiential corroboration for it at all. And experiential corroboration is the only actual corroboration you can find. There's two ways to get information, seemingly. One is from experience and the other is from some source of information. But that's a fallacy because a source of information is actually within your experience. So if you tell me something, then you seem to be a source of information. But in actual fact, the information is something that's appearing, as far as I can tell, spontaneously within my experience. So it's no different than seeing the color of the wall, which is appearing spontaneously within my experience. And it verifies itself, but not as to semantic information content. Like if you tell me, some piece of, a few sentences that are supposed to mean something, that cannot be verified, and is 100% inaccurate, simply because anything that can be said, well, let me back up, anything that's actual cannot be described. The problem is uncensored intake of information. When you're a small child, your parents are telling you things, And you probably accept it. You don't challenge it. You don't say, oh yeah, what's your evidence?
Or when you're beaten or bullied.
All of that, all of that.
It tends to create an experiences that don't seem to give into vastness.
Well, it does. The problem is that the interpretation of it doesn't. There's nothing but vastness, so everything dips into vastness. But the narration doesn't, and the narration is supported by semantic information. Basically, semantic information is always false, always inaccurate. Anything that can be said.
Those are cutting off from.
Huh?
There's a cutting off into a sense of experience of separateness.
Never a cutting off, it's just a distraction. Cannot be cut off from vastness. You're just distracted away from it.
Your own pain.
It went to fantasies. The pain is a vastness. You're not distracted into the pain, you're distracted into your stories.
Experience never stops.
Experience never stops. Experience is vast. Experience is infinite and unresolvable. Intrinsic, it can't not be. It can't not be that. But it can be easy. It can be possible and easy to not notice that fact if the mind is sufficiently distracted by fantasy.
It seems to be connected with the body mind.
But that's part of the fantasy. Identifying with the body, supposing you're in your body, supposing your body is in the world. All of these things are fantasies, concepts that you have been brainwashed in.
So instead, you are, I don't want to call it consciousness, but that which enables you to experience.
Sure, you can call it consciousness if you like. Yeah. It's self-evident, really.
Well, that's just another label.
Well, sure, of course, anything we can say is a label, so that's a given.
But we seem to have connected the experience of consciousness, mind, and body all into one seeming experience of self.
It is one, but it's not one in the structural sense that it may be being held to be. Body is consciousness, mind is consciousness, that lamp is consciousness, thought is consciousness, feeling is consciousness, subtle vibes are consciousness, everything is consciousness. So it's all one. The mistake is supposing there's some structural hierarchy. That the body is paramount and objectively exists, and the mind is some ephemeral little thing which is somehow in the body, subject to the body, and the body is some ephemeral thing which is subject to the environment. Objectivity makes the self the smallest element and makes the world the biggest element, whereas in actuality it's exactly the opposite, as I started talking about tonight. And again, this is not theory, it's very easy to see if you look in your experience. The problem is not looking because of being distracted. And when it's sufficiently distracted, one doesn't even know there is anything to look for, because this information is not really very common in the social information pool.
Not looking at what?
Not looking at actuality, not looking at the fact of experience, the fact of being as it is. Look at this that is actual, and let it show you the way in which it is what it is. And then it's readily obvious, it's non-hierarchical, it's instantaneous, it's transcendental, it's non-spatial, it's non-temporal.
What is it?
Well, you can't say. But it is what it is, and it's knowable what it is, but not knowable in a sense of describability. It's knowable in a sense of palpable and intimate participation with it, really. You know this the way you know your body. In fact, exactly the same way you know your body. It's just the way you know everything else as well.
I just noticed the shift. I mean, it's like, it was like the world, and then once those barriers.
Yeah, and they're not actual barriers, they're imaginary. Yeah. Mm. It's just hypnosis, really.
Well,
I mean,
okay, so then it becomes a pattern, and then it's like you have to, it's such a pattern that's gone on for years.
sure.
That it takes.
It takes whatever it takes.
Yeah.
It may take an extensive retraining and patterning. It may take just profound insight or in some combination of all that, who knows? But the powerful fact is that actuality and the nature of actuality is completely displayed. In other words, the truth is obvious, whereas all of this, all the delusion, all the misinterpretation has to be maintained and reinforced and reinstated continuously. You know, if you just sit, what's true? What's true is this. You know, so you have to, you know, to have your stories, you have to be telling yourself that. Oh no, I'm Peter Brown, and I'm this, and I'm that, and I'm this, and this, and this happened to me when I was 12 years old, and then blah, 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 blah. But, you know, if you're not telling the stories, then what's true? And if you are telling the stories, what's true? Where are the stories happening? What are the stories made of?
Now, if I can remember, anytime I see something going through my head, I know, okay, that's an addition.
Well, it's not that simple. It's not actually an addition, but just see the context. When anything's happening, whatever it isn't is also happening, right?
Or anything other than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything other than that, and there's infinite otherness.
Right.
So thoughts are happening, but meanwhile, light is present. You know, sensation is present, flavor is present, meaningfulness is present. You know, infinite weirdness that you don't have words for is present, always. So you don't need to have a war with your thoughts and have it be thoughts or not thoughts. It's always thoughts and not thoughts, and the not thoughts completely dwarfs the thoughts. They're completely, you know. There's just no. There's no. It's not a fair fight, let's say.
But David always seems to me. I mean, it's like David in your life. This little.
But let David win.
Oh, yeah.
When David's winning, or when Goliath is winning, what else is happening? It's not whether you can completely lose your battle with your thoughts every time. But even as that's happening, where is that happening? What's the context that that's happening in? Which it just completely supersedes all of that seeming event. It supersedes it and explains it because when you see what this is, then you see what thought is, and you see that thought isn't what it pretends to be. Thought isn't information about something. Thought is itself energy. And there's no about. Nothing is about anything. That's thought's big lie, that it pretends to be referential. You know, this word is about that. You know, I say that's a beautiful lamp. Or for that matter, I say that's an ugly lamp. And supposedly those words claim to be about something, and they aren't. They aren't about anything. They're just about their own existence. They don't refer to anything.
Maybe a way or something that it seems that physiologically, when like seeming sounds or hearing comes into play, that seems to be a connection to context.
Sure, that's fine. You know, in practice in yoga, take advantage of anything you can take advantage of. If you notice there's some area of your experience which is more explicitly and obviously, you know, non-conceptual and unresolvable, then by all means, you know, attend to it. You know, you don't get brownie points for making it harder for yourself.
Well, I stopped waiting for something to happen. Get that. It's not going to happen.
But there is, but the something is already happening. This is the something.
So I go with whatever I can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, for your, what you just said at the very beginning, how is this in any way you? I don't have any resonance with that. I just don't understand.
Yeah. If there is a you, then it's this. And any you that you've ever felt is this. So maybe if, oh, so you don't feel you, okay, then that not you is this. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just a jumping off point. I said, oh no, anything you can say is not accurate, so it doesn't really matter when it's a wash.
Well, most of the things you say, I resonate with, but from time to time you've said something much like that at the beginning, or what you said at the beginning, and I'm always going.
I'll explain it. If you think you exist, and you think you're Steve, and you're this body, and you're there, and you're this little primate wandering around this big world that's going to crush you, then that's the you that you may think exists. And if you look at that you, what that you actually is this actuality that contains the world, that contains the body, that contains all phenomena whatsoever. So if there seems to be a you, in other words, if your starting point is a you, an a priori you, then that you is everything. If your starting point is no you, then that's cool. Then the no you is everything. You know, the you is not included in the result, so to speak. The you may seem to be, a powerful starting point if it does, and I would imagine for most people, consensus reality mindset, they very much feel that they exist, and they very much feel that they are in their body or are their body or whatever. So that you, if they look at what is actually present, they will discover that all phenomena that is usually thought of as vast, like the galaxy and the world and everything else, is actually in the experience rather than the other way around. So in that case, the jumping off point of the you opens to everything. But any jumping off point opens to everything, so it's irrelevant. But I'm not insisting on a you. I'm just using it as an arbitrary starting off point on the assumption that that's most people's starting point.
I remember a while back, you know, listening to this or that person, teacher, whatever, and someone would say, well, you know, look at yourself, look inward and try and find yourself, your feeling of yourself. So I'd do that and it would be like, it would just pop out into this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never found anything, but literally it popped into this.
Right. Yeah. Good looking.
Well, it seemed almost too easy. I thought, hey, I missed something there. I have to go back to it again. Yeah. But after a while, I realized, well, it is that easy.
Yeah, I mean, and I think everyone's different in terms of their thing, their hold on their own self-definition, their hold on their own self, you know, sort of psychosomatic sense of orientation and stuff. And maybe that you're, by your nature or you know, history or whatever, had a little less of a sticky,
Well, I mean,
being lodged in that.
I can certainly feel like me and my body, and I can talk about me and have plans and do all this stuff. I can do, you know, all that good stuff. Just over time, you know, hanging out and listening and whatnot, it just doesn't come to anything. It just doesn't.
Well, it doesn't.
It's nothing but that kind of feeling when it's happening.
Right. But yeah, and that's what everything is, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really always just a way of putting things, and any way of putting things is totally inaccurate. So it's always a mistake to suppose that just because something was put a certain way, that it actually has anything to do with the way that it is. Obviously. You know, trying to express the inexpressible, obviously there's going to be a certain amount of mismatch in there. But you know, the bottom line always is, you know, attend to what is actual and let it show you what it is. Let it show you the way that it is what it is. Because it's not hidden. You know, it's not concealed at all. And that will invalidate all the erroneous, it will ultimately invalidate all the erroneous interpretations and misunderstandings you may be in the habit of holding about.
So for some things, I'll do that or try to do that, and I'll let the thing show me what it is, and instead of allowing it to happen just in sort of a natural, irrational way of opening, there's it's like I'll just sort of go into the track of like some sort of logical thinking or thinking that seems to make a certain sense, and I'll sort of go into the stories about that thing or
yeah. Your mistake is having a jumping off point of a thing. There's no things. So don't use a thing as a starting point. If there's a thing, then you have to run right next to the thing where there's no thing and use that as your starting point.
So it's like what needs to happen is to pair back to the rawness of the experience.
Well, you don't need to pair back. There's nothing but the rawness of experience. But you know, if you start with an erroneous assumption, then you're already starting with a reinforced, you know, inaccuracy.
Yeah. So if I start with the assumption of, oh, I have this problem.
Yeah, or any assumption, a problem or an object or a being or a situation or anything, that is something that is defined as being something, and nothing actually exists that is something. So because you're starting from that definition, you're hampering yourself because you're starting from something that's liable. You already think it is that, And since you're doing some kind of examination on it, it probably has some kind of charge for you. So right off the bat, you have 2 strikes against you.
Yeah, it's like I'm tying my legs together before I start to run.
Yeah, exactly.
So like a general question would be like, what is it that distracts and how does one get distracted, right? And the general answer would be that one starts with an assumption, or one sort of closes oneself off from the reality of experience before even starting the inquiry.
I don't think there's any value in trying to figure out how, in trying to deconstruct how you have false assumptions. Just ignore them and see what's here. I mean, you can get a PhD in the theory and science of false assumptions, but what's the point?
Yeah. Well,
they're wrong. They're imaginary. They don't exist. So why? So who gives a shit what their mechanism is?
Well, but oftentimes, one doesn't realize that one has an assumption, right?
Well, sure, maybe, but anything that seems to be something means you have an assumption. Anything that seems to be describable in even the vaguest ways means you have an assumption. And assumptions aren't evil. Assumptions aren't wrong. They're just not true. An assumption is like something that's going on in a movie that you're watching. So you're watching a movie. You went to see, you go to see the Avengers, and there's Thor up on screen cavorting around, and all that's happening. So that's an assumption that Thor is there and that he's cavorting. There's no fucking Thor. You're sitting in a movie theater and there's patterns of light on the screen. So, but having Thor there is not evil. It's great. You went there to see Thor. You want to have the fantasy. You want to have the entertainment. So the fantasy, the interpretation is not bad. Just see that it is an interpretation, and see that the interpretation consists of and exists in a context of actuality, which is not an interpretation. Thor exists in a context of absolute non-Thorness. When you go see the Thor movie in the theater, there's no Thor there. There's a movie theater and light on a screen. So, in other words, you don't need to dichotomize interpretations versus non-interpretations. Interpretations aren't the devil, they aren't evil. They're just small epiphenomena within a vast actuality. And they are not what they pretend to be in their own terms. So see what they are. And you see what they are by seeing what the context is that is not them. So if I'm all sucked into Thor being Thor and getting all excited about that, that's not a good context for examining Thor. The best context is to look over here at the screens next to the screen, next to the movie screen, and I see what's there. There's no Thor there, and I look back to Thor, and there's no Thor there. It's just a fantasy, the projection of Thor as an interpretation, a fantasy interpretation of something that is not that. And what it is experiential presence, the presence of transcendental experiential qualities, which we may call light or sound or whatever.
Is looking for subtlety in one's experience a good way of leading up to thinking, or not?
A good way of what?
No, facilitating seeing.
Sure, because actuality is infinitely subtle. But if you think subtlety is subtlety, then you're starting off with a thing again.
Yeah.
The actual subtlety isn't really subtlety.
And irresolvability isn't really irresolvability?
Irresolvability is more irresolvability than subtlety is subtlety. but it's a can of worms. Of course, it isn't really that. Nothing is really anything that can be said or thought. Unresolvability is a pretty good one, though. But again, look what it actually is. Forget about the idea. If you go looking at ideas, you're just liable to be seduced deeper into the ideas and not even know it. In other words, you'll be thinking about it instead of looking at the thing itself, which is impossible to think about.
Irresolvability is only irresolvability in the context of resolvability.
Correct, yes. Yes.
Except with a can of worms.
Can of worms, yeah.
Cover something.
A box of cockroaches.
Yeah, there you go.
Cockroaches, the same thing.
They come in boxes or bags?
Cage.
A cage, oh wow, a real colony.
When you get a cage of cockroaches, there's a cockroach wrangler somewhere. Puts them in there.
But we digress.
Do?
I don't know. I said it.
But that's why there really isn't any irresolvability.
Irresolvability is an antidote to resolvability, but neither of them actually exist. There's as much resolvability as there is unresolvability. Truth be told.
Equal measure? Oh, that's funny.
Unresolvability is powerful to look at simply because referential language, interpretations, depend upon resolvability to exist. You have to be able to know that something is something in order for it to be that thing. Whereas unresolvability pulls the plug on that. If someone was totally fixated on unresolvability, then resolvability would be a good antidote to that. But that's a rare thing because most people are so addicted to their verbal narrations and stories and descriptions of things.
Well, that's certainly what we're taught.
Yeah.
Non-thingness. It seems like the experience of non-thingness, because in seeing reality, from our seeming sense perceptions, thingness happens.
No, it's not the sense perceptions that make sameness, it's the interpretation that makes sameness.
Differentiating interpretation from senses is not obvious.
No, perhaps not.
So, in order to see non-thingness,
In order to see non-thingness, you could just look at the fact that experience is infinitely differentiated. And things are constructed in imagination by creating degrees of degrees of similarity of things that are actually absolutely different. So I can say, that sweater you're wearing is a sweater because it's a gray shape that is over there that seems to be on your body. And we can leave the body off for now. So the sweater is this gray thing, but in fact, the sweater is an infinity of grays. You know, and the sofa on it also has grays in it. And yet, in mental, you know, computer augmented processing, it's possible to say, but all these grays exist within a certain range of similarity, which are sufficiently similar that I can imagine that they're all essentially the same. And I can imagine that they're different from all the other grays around them, which are by degrees different. So by that, by a sort of a threshold of sufficient similarity, you can imagine integrity of unity where there's actually just an infinite differentiation. And that's done in imagination, it's done mentally. Sensorially, like in the field of vision, every single point is different than every other point. So there's no similarity, there's just this, it's a wash of infinite difference. And there's no outlines around things where everything within this outline is one way and everything outside it is not that way. So the thinness depends upon this kind of threshold of sufficient similarity as a mechanism, and that is imagined into existence. You know, it's created by data processing. You know, and by analysis in the imagination. Sensorially, there's just an infinite field of color. Well, it's actually not fabulous. It's actually obvious. It's being able to create objects. It's fabulous. Yeah. It's literally fabulous. Another thing one discovers when one is achieves sufficient proficiency in yoga is that the apparent sensory structuring and ordering of things is not particularly dominant or not particularly important in the scheme of things.
Arbitrary.
Well, I wouldn't say it's arbitrary, but it's not dominant. In other words, it's easy to think that the apparent geometries and things that appear sensorially are the important fact, whereas in fact they are not, that they're ways subsidiary to the primal facts, which are very nonlinear and non-spatial. In other words, all of the sensory information is like you know, lesser dimensional shadows being cast by other energy eventfulnesses which exist in non-spatial and non-temporal dimensions. Very much the way if you're outside and you see the shadow of a cloud passing, you know, you think that the shadow, you might think of the shadow as an event, but actually the shadow is not the event is the cloud going in front of the sun. So you have an event which is occurring in a different dimension, which has a result which is showing up here. and sensory experience can be seen in a similar light.
Oh, no.
All this time, right?
It's obvious, like when you dream. You know, when you dream, all of the spaces and dimensions and things that show up there aren't primary. They're aspects of something else going on somewhere, in some other whole dimensional context than the apparition of the seeming dream events.
So when you talk about primary, what I hear you say, and what I think you say, is that which enables this to occur.
Yes, you can think of it that way, sure.
But it's not a thing. We don't know what that is. We're assuming.
You can know it. You can know it intimately. There's no what involved though.
Well, we assume that seems like an assumption because you can't actually.
You can know it. As what it is. There's no as.
Well, you could also say that everything has within it the ability to be. Without having a primary.
No, I wouldn't put it that way. I don't think that's accurate. I would say the ability, everything is an embodiment of the ability to be. Only one thing has the ability to be.
There's nothing else.
And there's nothing else.
Now that you have to have come to you as a knowing.
Of course,
No way
you do have
to
it. You do have it as a knowing.
You do have that.
You have it. You have it as a knowing. I have it as a knowing. Everyone has it as a knowing. The question, the trick is to not be distracted by notions of other things being primary or being objectively true or being urgently important or having any importance whatsoever.
Would you say that searching for something helps you find it?
Possibly. If you think because if you think there's something to search for, then you're hampered by the assumption of what it is you think you're looking for, which is certainly wrong because there's no way you can know what you're looking for until you find it. I mean, you can't know what it is until you find it. Because you'll have erroneous, oversimplified ideas about it.
It just struck me that, searching for Waldo, is that what his name is?
Where's Waldo?
If you're looking for Waldo, that's all you're going to find. And it's not this.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, I mean, go ahead.
No, and you carry on.
Well, it's no big thing. I just remember one time I was in San Francisco and I was looking for a pair of boots. I had in mind the particular kind of boots I was going to try and buy. And I ended up going to like 6 different shoe shops and cobblers and whatnot all over the city. And somewhere towards the end of all of this, I don't even remember if I ever found the boots, but I realized, God, that was a great way to see the city. I went to all these different neighborhoods and met all these different people. And so the search, without its object in particular, as just as a kind of a function, as a almost a metaphor, but the experience was wonderful. It had really nothing to do with boots.
Boots for the MacGuffin.
MacGuffin, yeah, that's what it is, yes. Like in a movie.
have this image of tasting the apple, like we don't know what the apple tastes like. Until you tasted it, you can't describe it. It's like we tasted the apple when we were born and we were told it wasn't the apple. So we know the taste of the apple.
Yeah, true. Well, everyone knows. I mean, everyone knows reality because there's nothing else to know. But we have a misplaced sense of value, where we assume that, you know, what's the most supreme value is just garbage, is just unimportant, is irrelevant, and what's important is all of these facts and figures and stories that we've accumulated, and that somehow is emergency. You know, the supreme thing is being itself. And people think everyone knows being. Being is completely obvious, but people generally think being is unimportant as a human. Well, of course it is, but what's going on? You know, where's the ashram? Where's the story? What's happening? Which is, you know, in terms of reality, completely backwards. It's the being itself, which is not an abstract quality. Being, you know, I mean, that's another fallacy. Being is not an abstract quality. Dive! You're under attack.
My watch is thinks of something.
Mine's
That was this alarm.
Mine's linked. Yeah, all this stuff.
Being is not an abstraction. Isness is not an abstraction. It's supremely concrete. It's the only concrete. It's the only palpable thing. And next to it, everything else is an abstraction. Is ephemeral. Being is what you are. Being is the only thing that exists. If there is a you.
Well, that's what it is when you said we know something. You're talking about beingness.
When you say that what we know, I
was
don't
trying to
know.
go back to when you said, well, you already know it.
Oh, everyone knows it. Sure, of course.
And you're talking about beingness.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to put it. I mean, beingness isn't just beingness. What the word beingness refers to is, well, there's no words, of course, but it is beingness, but it is also everything. It's the supreme. It's the ground. It's the fundament. And of course, everyone knows it. It's that which never goes away. Everything else comes and goes, but that being doesn't go anywhere. Presence. I mean, I call it presence because that's a very accessible way to refer to it. Being sounds like an abstraction. You know, it sounds like a philosophical notion. Whereas presence is immediate and obvious. Is this present? Yes. Well, duh. Of course, it's present. And it's radiant in the sense that there's all of this shit seems to be appearing. When I refer to radiant presence, I'm referring to the same thing that can be referred to by saying being. And then all the specifics, all the details, all the
sounds.
Yeah, everything. All the you know, the experiential characteristics, the infinite, the 10,000 things, as they say, are the readout of that, are the shadows being cast by that, whatever, to speak poetically. But the important thing, always the important thing is to be where you are. You have to work with what your normalcy seems to be. Trying to jump into the absolute directly, unless you can do that. I mean, by all means do so. But if things seem to be a certain way to you, then that's your cutting edge. That's what your interface point is. And so it's essential to work with that, maybe incrementally, rather than trying to, just go to the end of the book, so to speak.
What do you mean incrementally?
Well, you may have to seem to chip away at it. In other words, the things, if your life seems to you very solid and real and materially based and what have you, then that is your actuality that you have to work with. And you work with that by seeing through it as much as you can, which may or may not be the final seeing through, but most likely, perhaps, will be an incremental seeing through, where you'll see through it, and you'll go, oh, interesting. But your life will still seem to be more or less what it was. And then so you sort of you accumulate experientially a whole series of these seeing throughs, which gradually come to invalidate the solidity of your sense of normalcy. And it will become, you'll find yourself gradually evolving into more subtle orientation to things.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's seeing through or being incremental of this.
Well, it's not important.
Yeah, I don't know. In my experience, it's either full-on delusional or very obviously just being present.
Very obviously, just what?
Just present.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's seeing through. But as you accumulate experiences of just presence, then the full-on delusion will become less so. Basically, ultimately, presence wins because presence is actual and the delusion isn't. I mean, it's actual in the sense that it exists, but it's not actual in the sense that it's accurate or true. So that's what I mean by incremental.
So there again.
So if you have experiences of presence, every time you have an experience of presence, that will incrementally invalidate.
Yeah. I know. But then it says something else.
Oh. And ultimately, so you're having experiences of presence, you're having experiences of your normalcy. But ultimately, the presence is going to dominate, it's going to trump because it's true and actual, whereas the normalcy in its own terms is not. That's why if you have both those experiences, the presence is going to win. It's an uneven contest. It's like a tug of war where all the big guys are on one side of the road.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like something that I'm in control of.
No, of course not. You're not in control of it, but you participate in it, and in that participation, there is participation. It may not be control in any simple sense, but the very fact that you give it attention feeds it, perhaps. Not that you're necessarily in control of giving it attention, but again, the fact that you do feeds it.
Well, there is a sense there's control of time spent. So,
So that maybe that's in the mix, whatever. And also, as you have more and more experiences of seeing presence, it will be easier and easier for you to see, because you kind of learn how to do it. You learn how to go there, directly. It's like learning to ride a bicycle or something. The more you do it, the more second nature it is.
I think some of the best instruction I've heard you say is just let this show you what it is.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily passive in any way, but it's very opening.
Yeah. It's the very nature of what this is opening. It's absolutely unstable. It moves into itself. Whenever you start with experience, whatever your starting point is, if you attend to the actuality of your experience, you'll notice it immediately morphs and drifts and grows and goes elsewhere.
I like that one too.
Yeah.
And that, of course, invalidates the idea of, a closed surface of experience that is a certain way, that is somehow fixed there and stuck there and statically there. What experience actually is like this, is like a dream that continually is going somewhere else, always.
Well, I think maybe also it would help move one's sense of things away from looking for something,
Yeah,
looking
of
for
course.
a particular quality, even something imagined.
Yeah, whatever your jumping off point is, you immediately leave it. You can't actually stay there.
Doesn't seem like something seeming to be a certain way and seeing through it are two mutually exclusive things.
Say that again?
It seems like the seeing through something and it seeming to be a certain way sort of coexist.
Yeah.
Coexist, or are they at odds with each other?
They coexist.
Yeah, like seeing through something doesn't necessarily negate that it seems to be a certain way.
Right. But ultimately it does, because the seeing through is what is truly there, whereas that it is a certain way has to be reinforced and reinstated, because experientially, any way that anything is instantaneously something else. So for it to actually be a certain way, that has to be enforced conceptually, ultimately conceptually, even if it's unconscious.
Well, it can be a certain way, if you kind of hold that lightly, then it can be whatever it is as it goes, you see. So I look at the drape and it has very distinct sense of it is that way, but I don't have to hold on to that. It doesn't have to stay that way. It just, that's quality, and that quality is quite vivid, but it just disappears too. I
guess what I was referring to is the fact that seems to be a drape doesn't just vanish.
No, but you see what it actually is, and you see that a drape is a euphemism for something that is infinitely dimensional and not any one way. Things are not negated by seeing what they are, but when you see what they are, you discover they're vastly, infinitely more than you thought they were. But the thing itself is not negated. The drape doesn't stop being a drape because you see what it actually is. But it's found to be so much more, it's so vastly, infinitely more than just a drape in any simple sense that you may have conceived of it.
That's what makes it so wild.
Yeah. Yeah, things aren't negated. You carry the world with you, but the world turns out to be an infinite dimensional, constantly morphing dream palace.
Okay, it just seemed like there was a suggestion that the seeming was opposed to the.
No, not at all. Nothing's opposed to anything, really. I mean, because there are no conditions which exist limitedly enough to be a certain way that there could be something else that's some other way. Ultimately, there's only one condition, which is this. So any way that it seems obviously coexists with any other way that it can seem, and all these seemings are not what it actually is. They're just, like flashes of implication.
When you say, nothing is what it seems to be, and it's infinite. I don't know the exact word, something infinite, but experientially, it seems. Let's say I'm looking at something, so visually there's a little bit the dynamism we talk about.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's not that I've done acid, but I assume it's not like all over the place, like, oh, I'm looking at a drape and it's looking like a, I don't know, cat. It still looks more or less the same, but I don't know if that's your experience, but but looking at the drape, then and persistently it starts morphing in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And then on other dimensions, in terms of auditory or whatever sensory, it's obviously always changing.
Yeah.
So that is what you talk about when you say infinite.
Sure.
Meaning it's still
It's easy to say
the seemingly appearance that we.
Well, yes and no, but you have to look at what the seeming appearance is made up of the subtleties of real-time experience, real-time flavors. And those subtleties of real-time flavors are continually morphing. So the appearance is maintained, but it's not actually maintained because the subtle elements which maintain it are all changing. So in other words, you could look at that drape, suppose you lived here and you came into this room, 100 times a day, and you saw that drape 100 times a day, and every time you saw that drape, you would recognize it as that drape. But every single time you saw that drape, every detail, and I'm speaking precise details, of exactly what you're experiencing would be different than every other time. So
This I don't know if this is true, but the analogy that came to mind when you were talking is basically at the quantum level. So if this is like what is it saying? You can't dip in the same river twice.
Yeah, well, at the quantum level, that's true, but it is the same thing, but it's also true on the gross experiential level. Again, it seems like subtleties, but this is an important point. Your overall take of it is made of the subtleties. It's a sum total of all the subtleties, and the subtleties themselves are constantly morphing and never repeating. I mean, when you live in that, you live in your house, your place where you live, and so you've been there, hundreds of times. You wake up in the morning, you walk into the rooms. It's the same room you walked into yesterday, more or less. Blah blah blah, and it's all very recognizable. But all of that level of description glosses over the fact that your actual experience of that room is never the same on two occasions. In details. In broad strokes it may be, but the broad strokes don't exist. Experience is made of details. Experience is not made of broad strokes. It's the imagination that supplies broad strokes. The imagination says that's a drape. Experience says, and is unique in that instant, it will never happen again. Now again, it's a mistake to try to turn this into a dichotomy, where there's details that are changing and then there's broad strokes that aren't. But the details are the only things actually there. There's nothing in experience but details. There are no broad strokes. Broad strokes are imaginary. So that there is a drape is imaginary. There's this barrage of sensory information, which is extended across a vast area of space and constituting a vast area of a vast quantity of visual information, all of which is extremely unstable. So that there is a drape is an assertion. That broad stroke is imaginary. If there's no drape, is unique. You know, you see it later, the light hits it different, your head is an inch, an eighth of an inch this way, and all of a sudden everything's different. Everything. All the details are different. But although a broad stroke is still different, there's still a drape is just sitting there, But that version, that level of description doesn't exist. It only exists in imagination. Experience is made of details. What you actually experience are details. You don't experience broad strokes. This is a really important point.
Is this going back to what you talked before, sort of something that instantaneously or spontaneously just happened, where you continuously open up to that? Because experientially, it's clear that everything changes. I mean, obviously, if you're not a statue. Our experience is changing all the time.
Of course.
In a kind of way, but it's changing.
Yeah.
But just language is
right. Exactly.
Language and work and living and working in this world, so to speak.
Right.
You keep reaffirming.
Yes, exactly.
Even without using words.
Yes, of course. But yes. But over time, it changes. Over time, it wears away.
And in here, you sit and you're still able to function in this world.
Of course.
This is a drape and this is not.
Of course, I can do that. I just know it's not true. It's not. Its ability to form imaginary abstractions is fine. Just know what they actually are. Don't believe that they're true, because it's your beliefs that will feel like they trap you. Everything is infinitely unlimited. So I can erect provisional beliefs that they aren't, but that doesn't make it so. Everything is still infinite and unlimited. So I can say that's a drape, but I know perfectly well it isn't. So I'm not entrapped by the fact that that's a drape. I'm not entrapped by the fact that this isn't the world. I can say it's a world. I can say, yeah, it's a world over here. We're here in Kensington and the Bay Area, and kind of a nice place to live. I mean, I can bullshit with the best of them, but it's all. I know that none of that is true. I know it for fact. I know it most intimately, and it's coming to see what is true that invalidates relatively what is not true, or let's say what is less true, if you will. It's not true that, yes, that's a drape and it's changing. It's true that it's not a drape, it's changing. And yet I can call it a drape, but I know there's no drape there.
There's no need to remember this. This is not.
No,
it's not an imaginary task.
It's not. It's not something that's held in the conscious mind. It's something that's known intimately, like you know how to breathe and you know how to walk. This is why yoga has to be experiential. It's not conceptual. It has to be seen, and that's what empowers it. That's what makes it transformative.
You can experience the abstraction.
Absolutely.
I mean,
there's no dichotomies. I don't mean to suggest there's any dichotomies.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's sort of like. Well, I'd say that, I go back and forth, but, between, just sort of being solid, everything's solid, and, of course it's real. But I can also break down and sort of watch myself doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, me on a day-to-day basis, I live my life pretty much probably like anyone, with a mindset like anyone. You know, I get up, I wonder what I'm going to do today. I look around and say, oh, the weather's nice today. Well, it's a pretty day. You know, what am I going to do? Go out and get in my car and notice, oh, I need to wash. You know, but I know that that's not what's happening here. I mean, I know it fundamentally. I know it intimately. And this is the goal of yoga, is to live in reality, even as you know, you then become free to dip into fantasy to any degree. It's like knowing, if you know what you're watching is a movie, then you're free to enjoy the movie without needing to get scared every time the villain shows up. You know, you get titillated instead. Anyway, it's way past our break time, so why don't we pause for a minute, get some dessert.
What? What? Is it what? That's good. Okay. There's a texture that's happening. There's a texture that was happening.
Okay.
Did you go to your, weekend?
I did.
How was it?
Really new. I don't think. I went with a friend who's Christian.
Oh,
And she freaked out a little bit.
oh,
Yeah. He told me, the facilitator told her, that's a something you just applied it. Yeah. And then she became really open to it. She really got it. So I was surprised.
yeah. Without having some resistance.
Yeah, exactly. I always talk to Peter, Christian, I believe in God.
What was the
That mess with stuff.
Oh, you did that?
Yeah.
You have the app?
That?
Yeah, there's a Headless Way app.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna get it.
It's free.
Yeah. I don't think I'll do it again.
once you get the idea, then
Yeah, Gavin got one.
The beard went away. That was fast.
Coming back,
Is it coming back?
it can go away very fast. It's about 60 seconds to shave.
Yeah. Without
Takes
shaving,
ways to grow.
without shaving cream, it's 60 seconds. Probably 3 minutes with shaving cream. But I do it without shaving cream a lot. I just put that on my dating profile. What secret thing about yourself are you willing to say about shaving a manly way without shaving cream?
In the foolish way.
And wear men's underwear. Yeah, the Steve Martin joke.
Wearing men's underwear is a secret. I would say it's the opposite would be the secret.
Well, then that's what's made it funny.
No, I usually wear men's underwear.
I don't understand. Well, that was a great opening.
Was it?
Yeah.
I don't remember it. What did I say?
Everything exists within you.
I thought so.
That's it.
That's one way to describe the biggest shift of realization. Before realization, you're a little entity in a vast system. After realization, you're a vast entity with all sorts of little systems preparing you to except for the you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good enough. It's just sometimes nice to have you talk here, even for that short little time, as opposed to Open Secret where you go there.
Oh, no, for sure. I could have gone on, but I'm kind of tired tonight. So.
That was good enough. That was enough.
Tonight of all nights, Pam didn't have dickhead.
She didn't have
No, I didn't have Pam.
oh, wow.
You don't have enough edge.
You noticed.
Pretty nice. Oh, I like this. Have you tried it? It's a little high, kind of, you know. Yeah. Cool, you want to try it? Yeah, stop, so it won't go too far. It's got piston.
I like it.
Yeah, cool. We're test riding your rocker. We're test riding your rocker. Yeah.
Was it yours? Yeah, I brought it.
Oh.
Did you get this at Camping World or someplace?
They have them at Marine, West Marine.
On West Marine?
Yeah. The first one I got at REI, and then
What did they run at West Marine?
49.
That sounds like right.
And then REI only had them a little while.
It's not cheap, that's nice. Wow.
Yeah, it's right. And then Dave realized he wanted one. And somebody told me, oh, West Marine has, and you go in and they have like a whole line of them, and they're always there. So
Different colors?
I don't think so. I think they're all blue, but I'm not sure.
You wanna try this one?
It's the only folding chair I've ever
Huh?
met. It's the only comfortable folding chair I've ever seen. Most of
I
them
bet,
have.
I was at Camping World one day up there in Fairfield,
Yeah, I know. I've been there.
and they had a rocker that was actually had rocking, like this, curved things, and it pulled it up.
It did? Wow.
And it was really very, very
Uh-huh.
comfortable. I was surprised. I don't know if it was better or worse, I can't remember, but it was really nice.
But you did buy it.
I didn't buy it. I think they still have them, so maybe one of these days, but I don't know, this is pretty.
I love it. Most folding chairs, the back doesn't support you.
Yeah,
Mine, but that one feels good.
I bought one folding chair, kind of on a lark. I went to this air show one day, and this guy was selling them. And it's kind of big, and kind of heavy, but it's really well built, and it does have a very supportive
Yeah.
But you know what I like too, those gravity chairs?
I've seen, yeah. You mean, which ones? Do you mean the ones you kneel in?
No, it's like a chaise lounge one, it's all spread out,
Oh,
but they call it a gravity chair because you can kind of just adjust it with your weight of your body.
oh, and it kind of goes up as much as you do.
You can go so you.
Yeah, you can go up to where you're sitting like this, or you can lay all the way back. And I want to get one of those and tack it onto the RV so that I can watch the sky at night, that sort of thing. I'm too old for that.
Yeah. Well, the only bad thing is it's kind of heavy.
Yeah, it's nice. Here, I'll give it back to you.
That's fine.
You wanted to pack it in.
Oh, here.
The trees really grew a lot this during this rainy season. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and like this bush down here.
Is this a big? This one here looks like a big trellis.
No, it's blossoms.
Oh.
Like
It
a
is.
tulip. I call it a tulip tree.
Yeah, they're all neat.
Can you hear
That's
that?
everything. It's at the end of the year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They're mostly 4 and 5 volts. So that once the thing, they just take advantage.
I bet you missed the softie, they just have you around the finger.
Yeah, basically. It's not what I can I prefer that than to waste my energy constantly enforcing my
You can't enforce foreign plans.
Yeah.
What are you doing now? Well,
Hello.
That's some good picture.
Would you mind mentioning again that stuff about one's experience is made up of details?
Your experience is made up of specifics.
Yeah.
You don't experience generalities, you don't experience abstractions, you experience the specifics that you're actually experiencing. And the specifics that you're actually experiencing occur or appear, you might say, in the way that they do. One of which ways is absolutely instantaneously, absolutely unstably, continually morphing, absolutely non-repetitively. You never experience exactly the same experience characteristic in two consecutive occasions, and so on. So the notion that anything whatsoever that can be experienced that has any stability or any persistence over time is an abstraction and doesn't actually occur within the details of your experience. And the details of your experience is all that is present. There's nothing but details. Experience is made of its details.
So from the point of view of the mind and its interpretations, that looks like vague, and the specifics look like vague generalities.
Well, maybe so, but it's actually the opposite. The mind manufactures stabilities and manufactures coherent objects and entities in its imagination, simply because that's what it's equipped to deal with. But nothing like that actually exists. You know, this is really the cutting edge of yoga, practical yoga. Once one notices that this is the case, if one continues to notice that's the case, and over time this will completely invalidate the validity of these abstractions, these gross abstractions.
Can you talk about that in the context of thoughts or abstractions in the form of thoughts? Because it seems, and perhaps that's enough, but it seems easier to see that as it relates to objects.
What other kind of abstractions are you referring to than objects?
No, I'm saying if I'm looking at the rug, or
right.
It's easier, I think, to experientially feel the invalidity of the term rug.
Right. Okay.
Whereas it feels experientially most of my days in thought realms, abstracting. So there's multiple layers of abstraction there.
Yeah. You have to
achieve something.
Right. You have to practice yoga. You have to refer back to the actual experiential basis for your abstraction. So whatever abstraction you're dealing with in your mind, there must be some experiential basis for it, or it's absolutely nothing. Some experiential basis. Give me an example of something which doesn't have experiential basis.
it's not that it doesn't have, but it's just multiple layers.
Right.
And it's a, the
Yeah.
experience, so let's say I'm ideating about solutions to a problem in Africa. I've never stepped in Africa.
Right.
And, you know, it's hearsay about hearsay about hearsay.
Right. In that case, the object of your experience is the basis of the hearsay. Suppose it's something you read in a paper or something someone told you. So the paper, in that case, is the actual experiential basis for the abstraction.
Right.
And then you're supposing that it's about something in Africa which you've never seen or whatever, but that supposition exists in the paper, not in some Africa. And anyhow, it's not, for yoga, it's not important to deconstruct these things one at a time. If you deconstruct any one abstraction, you will ultimately successfully deconstruct all abstractions. If you just work with the rug, you will solve your entire universe of abstractions. Because experientially, you get the principle, and it's the principle that's the powerful thing. It's not like you need to go through, serially and deconstruct each of your abstractions one at a time, and then move on to the next one. When you see the relationship between any abstraction and actual experience, that is powerful to undermine all of your abstractions sufficiently for the purposes of yoga. And again, the goal isn't to, abstractions aren't the enemy. The goal is to see what they actually are. See that they're imaginary expedients that are used for thought and discussion and what have you, that refer to conditions which are not the way that the abstractions imply that they are. So yoga is very easy. You just need to do it. You need to do it well one place.
Yeah.
And it applies everywhere. Or, if you're like most of us, you'll dance around because you get bored of staring at the rug for a while. But ultimately, it's the same principle. It's the same thing anywhere. Because what you're seeing is the same. Actuality is always the same as itself. I mean, it always looks different, but what it is and the way that it is that is always absolutely identical.
I like how you were saying about like any material experience or material seeming experience is actually the result or the sort of after image of these deep forces or whatever these these subtle and indiscernible energies. What came to mind was that that part of 2001 Space Odyssey where the guy is eating breakfast or something like that. Like that's a real thing that's gone on. and then it's like that's producing everything, or like when you're saying that, like I was looking at the rug and just like one square on that rug, and then it was like there's this interior psychic space that like just there's like a realization of like the fullness of energy there.
Sure.
Like that's really what's going on, or that's not like the other thing isn't happening, but it's like the subtlety is generally overlooked, than
Yeah, because of being distracted by the abstractions.
That was the question I had was the seeing, you know, seems to always come with nourishment. Or
Oh, yeah.
it seems to always come with really expansion and like it feels good.
Yeah, because what is seen is reality itself, and reality explicitly displays all of its properties. When I say displays, I mean it is known. They're known in the seeing, and reality itself is pure beauty, pure nutrition, pure power, pure magic, pure meaningfulness, pure intelligence. I mean, so far beyond any human scale. And again, this is immediately obvious in the seeing itself. You know, the sort of mindset that dealing with abstractions tends to perpetuate is very, very, very heavily censored. It's really stepped down and small and little and dry and lifeless, and whereas actuality is pure life force, it's pure intelligence, it's pure profundity. And again, this becomes it's obvious. It's not something one needs to reach for or supply. It communicates itself that it is that, for sure. Yeah. Yummy.
Yeah, so you wouldn't really get bored looking at the book because you feel the nourishment, you feel the revelation.
Yeah, of course.
Whatever.
Of course. And if you do seem to get bored and you look elsewhere, you find the same thing elsewhere. So it's no harm, no foul. You can't get away from it. The trick is to let yourself see it, and then you get to partake of it, and you get to drink it.
And then pretty much you're just speechless.
Yeah.
Everything stops.
Yeah, or you go on babbling, but it's neither here nor there because it's that.
Right.
Reality doesn't have any opposites. It excludes all of its modes. But speechlessness certainly happens, in my experience.
These days it feels like almost everything that comes out of my mouth is just right on the edge of babbling.
No,
Glossolalia or something.
well, it is really. I mean, it is again because all language is gibberish.
Really helpful to take your glasses off.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Oh, wow.
Cheap thrills.
Can you see the road?
There is no rug.
That's what I meant.
No, I mean there's no rug. What rug? Where?
thing I've had fun with for a long time is, in terms of kind of checking out an abstraction is time, and just sort of more and more realizing that there isn't any.
No.
There's no before, there's no after, there's no now, there's no nothing. And that's, so you can't see anything again. And, anyway, just hanging out with that, like a koan or something, it's just been wonderful these last few years.
There's no now?
No, where is it?
You can't find it. There's nothing but now, but you can't
There's
find
nothing
it.
but now, but, what is it? You can't say.
Yeah, you can't find it.
There is now.
In short, it just, all that is meaningless. Anything that you say now or then or whatever always refers to another concept, so it's just like puddles of concepts that, like, as a tiger runs around and melts into butter. But you can do that with anything like that, in a sense. Those are sort of like a space is a good one too. Fear there. I mean, those are the kind of locator abstractions. Same thing. I mean, you could do, I think, the same thing with yourself. What am I? Who am I? Where is I? So I think it's simpler to work with. Anyway, whatever. It's just been fun.
So Peter, when you loosen up, when you realize that the dynamics of time and space aren't what you thought, and you start letting go, I don't know what my question is. I mean, life still happens, but like Steve's saying, it's not happening because of cause and effect or anything. It's
Well, it never was happening because of cause and effect. Because again, if you look at what happening means, you can't find that either. It doesn't stop it. What we think of as being happening is obviously happening. But, what is that? How's that work? What's up with that? You can't, it's just, you can't find what it is.
So even though I may be loosening up and I'm kind of more in wonderment about how anything's happening, it still happens the way it always did.
Of course, it was always that way.
Yeah.
Coming to see what it is doesn't change what it has been. You see that it has always been what it is. You just may not have recognized it. And so coming to recognize it more profoundly enables you to enjoy it and appreciate it more richly, more profoundly. But it doesn't change anything.
That's where the yummy comes in.
Yeah.
The perk.
Yeah, the perk. You get to do all this spiritual work, and then there's the perks. The value added.
Emptiness is like the emptiness that's talked about in spiritual discourses. That's an emptiness of like definable structures or resolvability or
Yes.
So like the abstraction that sort of most immediately accrues to that is the idea of lack.
This idea of what?
Lack. Yeah, like
I'm not following you. You mean the notion of emptiness is somehow a lack?
that there's like that's the sort of mind take on emptiness, right?
Oh, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that's absurd. So it's irrelevant. The emptiness, since concepts and interpretations are what limits and seems to reduce actuality, the emptiness of those concepts and interpretations is not a lack, it's exactly the opposite of a lack. The concepts and interpretations create a sense of lack by creating a sense of limitation where there is none. So however one ordinarily thinks of these things is irrelevant. The important point always is to see what it really is. Interpretive framework and conceptual thought is profoundly diminishing. I mean, not actually, nothing's actually diminished, but the implication that it seems to create is a sense of limitation, of diminishment.
Didn't stay.
Yeah, when you describe something, then it becomes smaller than anything that's omitted in the description. Whereas the undescribed actuality has no size or dimension relative to anything else. So you can't say what the scale of things is. Description creates, it can create a seeming scale or an implication of scale, which doesn't actually exist.
Whatever interpretation is adopted in the moment is going to have its seeming limitations, right?
Yeah, of course. That's how interpretations work. Interpretations work by discriminating between something and everything else. So if I talk about this rug, the rug exists only by virtue of everything that's not the rug. So I'm dividing the universe into two, the rug and not rug. And so since not rug is obviously much bigger, much vaster than rug, then by creating rug, I'm creating a smallness. Whereas if there's no rug, there's just this, and the vastness comes with.
Yeah, because it seems that deeply ingrained habit is to orient from a mind-body standpoint. So even when seeing that is clear, the interpretation is empty. It's not that there isn't a limitation to the interpretation.
Yeah, exactly, because the limitation is implicit in the whole worldview that gives you a mind and a body too. I mean, that's why I call them interpretive frameworks, because they're implicit. It's a whole seeming network of interpretations that all verify each other. Interpretations don't exist in a vacuum. They exist as a whole historic worldview, or an implication of a worldview.
And the whole notion of time is construed on memory that comes in now of all of that.
Good, sure. Yeah. Well, you could say that, but again, what memory is and all that is, a big question mark. Or time is a hypothesis to explain memory, but
Or is it the other way around?
well, whatever. Yeah, exactly. But you don't know. You can't find what time is. You can't find what memory is. The phenomena exist in whatever way that they do. but if God knows what they are, you can resolve them.
Yeah, like when you start thinking about memory or the past or whatever that can involve. This happened to me, and that and my mom did that to me, or you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But it is so incredibly complex. I mean, you know, these constructs, but it's sort of like a house of cards in a way, because it can just sort of disappear.
Yeah.
I mean, it might come back, you know, next year. I'll think about that whole complex again, but it is pretty flimsy.
Yeah, it's flimsy. And again, as you say, I mean, it's like what we were talking about just a moment ago. Interpretive frameworks may have a simple seed, but they imply a whole galaxy of implication in that.
Yeah.
It follows from that.
So like when I was talking about the square and the rug, and like there's a recognition of subtlety of that, like the almost like another dimensionality of it. So there's like when one can look at a thought or an idea or an emotional texture in the same way.
Of course, anything. It doesn't matter what your starting point is. It's the nature of experience that is that way. So any experience, no matter what you're calling it, will reveal exactly the same characteristics. All experience is the same way. As humans, we're expert at pretending to categorize our experience into all different sections, different sense fields, and blah, blah, blah. But all of that is imaginary. The experience is one thing, and it only happens in one way.
It's not really helpful to say it only happens in one way. Why is that?
Well, you can't say what that way is, but it is only one way. It is what it is. It is what it is in the way that it is that.
That's right.
And that is always the case.
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, words fail. That's a given.
Once again.
So it's interesting because you have to let go of everything. You have to, but there's a letting go and a order, and you know, there's more flow and freedom or whatever, but there's that intricate order of the intelligence.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's very paradoxical. It's inconceivably interrelated with itself with infinite perfection and functionality. But it's in a nonlinear, irrational, bizarre way that, you can't possibly get a handle on, and yet it's apparent that it is so. I mean, the whole thing is just.
It's like you have to be spontaneous to get, I don't know, I'm not even gonna try to.
Yeah, really. Try to not be spontaneous sometimes.
I like what Pam said about our history just disappearing.
Yeah, well, sure. History is only there when you put it there.
Oh.
Yeah, it totally is. Nothing stands up to scrutiny. Nothing stands up to seeing what it is. If you look at your memory or your history and see what it actually is, there's nothing there.
I think we talked about this one time about memory is, basically something that I just created just right now,
Of course it is.
as opposed to, any other length of period of time.
Of course, if everything, if it appears in the instant, everything appears in the instant. If you remember what you had for lunch yesterday, you're remembering that now.
Mm-hmm.
And the memory is unique to now. If you remembered what you had for lunch yesterday 5 minutes ago, you would have had a different memory.
Right.
I mean, you might have used the same words to describe it,
Yeah.
but what you actually experienced and pictured or whatever would be different.
Right.
And all is with details. So the problem with our histories isn't our histories. The problem with our histories is our tendency to hold it the way we do.
Sure.
I mean, if there is a problem.
It's the same. The other thing strange is that we talked about before. Seemingly there is a consistent shape to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you generally don't remember things that have never happened in your past, or you start remembering something that has happened to somebody else.
Yeah, but I mean, and it's speaking very loosely. But every time you remember something that happened in your past, you remember it differently. So is there really an it? There seems to be something. If I remember something particular major incident in my past, that I seem to be able to remember from time to time. Every time I remember it, it's unique, and I remember it differently. But it's still, in a loose way, is arguably similar to the other times that I remember it. And what's up with that? But again, you can't pin it down.
The experience itself is inaccurate. I mean, every description of the.
Yeah, the experience, it's not inaccurate, it's unresolvable. So that anything happened, the description is always wrong, which is why you can experience things so profoundly different. I mean, this can work, and people who go through psychotherapy or all just any kind of experience are familiar with this. You can think of one parent as being really mean to you or something or whatever. And then you can come to a realization that, wow, they weren't really like that, it was something else, and so on and so forth. It's just a matter of, there's no really way that it was, it's all different ways of seeing it.
Peter, you were talking earlier about Mahesh and staying awake with the sense of the intensity of the energy. There's a way in which the energy system gets tuned, right? So that there can be like for me in my experience, there feels to be a sort of energetic fullness, right? And it's like I'll yawn a lot, at the beginning of these meetings often.
Uh-huh.
Right? What can you say about that? Can you say more about that?
What can I say about the fact that you yawn?
No. Like I could have the interpretation that you're born, but that would just be an interpretation. That would be false.
I don't know. I don't know. You tell me.
No, like.
Don't you think the poor is usually the last one to know that they're poor?
So, but you talked before about Pino tuning the stream by moving the rocks around, right? Like that was the sort of healing that he would do, right? And that seems to me akin to somehow being comfortable with a certain intensity of experience.
Yeah.
And maintaining a certain.
Well, as you mature, you know, spiritually, as you unfold, you become more comfortable with a broader range of energy textures. When you're immature, you have a kind of a narrow comfort zone. And anything outside of that comfort zone is liable to provoke some kind of reaction. It might be boredom, it might be insecurity, whatever. I mean, but as you mature, you become comfortable, and your comfort zone expands. Because you come to see the common denominator, you come to see these, what you're thinking of, what you're used to thinking of in the past as, big differences in energy flavor or whatever, are not actually that big. They're actually different versions of the same thing. I mean, that applies across the board in terms of comfort is being, as unfoldment proceeds, one becomes more and more comfortable at being with things in different ways. So your range of acceptable behaviors may expand and things like that, for example.
Range of acceptable behaviors?
Yeah, just as an example. You might find yourself comfortable engaging in something that you would not have been comfortable engaging in previous times or something, perhaps. But it's all the same principle. As you become aware that everything is what it is and nothing is precarious, then there's a tendency to relax and not needed to be held in a narrow way. And so one loosens up with it and lightens up with it and lets it be however it seems to be without needing to provoke some kind of a reaction or resistance on your part.
What comes to mind is like the tree, right?
Yes.
And there's like especially when you talk about like certain behaviors that more or less acceptable. And it's almost like there's these certain assumptions or there's certain fixities at different levels of the tree.
Sure.
That when one gets a glimpse that's not necessary or that's
exactly. It comes down to what you identify yourself as. When you identify yourself in a narrow way, then anything beyond that identification is precarious or threatening or problematic or disturbing or uninteresting or whatever. But as your definition of yourself relaxes and broadens, which it will as unfoldment occurs, then naturally it opens up and you become more comfortable with a broader range of qualities.
So there's certain there's a sense of certain fixities in my typical experience,
Right.
and then like I want to say like it's like I come to see you and like there's not a sense of the same fixity, right? And then there's like there's almost like there's a glimpse seen of that invalidates continuation of the holding or whatever. But it's almost like it says way too much, like there's an intention or something, but it's almost like you hold open the possibility of a lack of fixation or something like that through a certain expressed comfortability.
I point it out, and I also embody it to whatever extent that I do, and that may or may not have some degree of palpability. That was funny.
She's been that way all night.
Yeah, you embody it. It's palpable and strong, and that's why I was laughing.
How do you experience the seeming awareness of what's happening as being strong or consistent or there, or as opposed to fleeting and more fluid, coming from being strong?
None of those notions are really relevant, so I can't really talk about that.
How is that not relevant?
Because they're strong is only meaningful if there was some non-strong. Fleeting is only meaningful if there was some non-fleeting. And this is as fleeting as it is, and it's as non-fleeting as it is. It's as strong as it is. It's as non-strong as it is. So none of those qualities apply in terms of any kind of dichotomy. So you can't call it strong because it's meaningless unless there was some non-strong.
All right, never mind. I didn't express it how what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
I experience the more I let go of like solid notions of what things are,
Huh?
the more relaxed or fluid things seem to be.
Uh-huh.
But also, I noticed my awareness just taking a lot of breaks.
What do you mean by
Get
that?
lazy.
And
Tell me about it.
I mean, I don't know whether it's symptomatic of age or.
What specifically do you mean by taking breaks?
Just,
What happens when it takes a break?
just not being there, just kind of gone, spaced out.
But everyone's awareness is like that. That's just a matter of being more sensitive to what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Awareness drifts around. Awareness is absolutely inconstant.
I'm finding this even more so than ever. I mean, really,
I get to see something.
Well, I mean,
that's not your, I'm just wondering if that's your experience, because you always seem so,
it's my experience. Sure. Yeah. I mean, awareness is very, very strange. It's absolutely dynamic. It dances around and turns itself off and turns itself on and broadens and shrinks. And
yeah.
I mean, it's like a mosquito on acid flittering
Very dragging.
and awareness is always like that. I think again, as one becomes more sensitive, relaxes into the ways things actually are, experience actually is, this becomes more and more apparent. Because again, it's easy to pretend it isn't that way. Like if I'm looking at your face, it's easy to pretend I'm looking at your face. But if I actually look at what I'm doing, I'm like, remembering this and taking that, and notification. Yeah.
Well, I've heard you say that it's, everything has the same hierarchy. There's no one place that's better.
Yes.
And yet, just the coming to awareness seems so incredibly rich.
Well, it is. But it's paradoxical because when you come to awareness, you realize you've never left it and you always were at it.
Well,
So it's not actually better. If there was a better, then seeing it is better. I'll go that far. How's that? If there was a better, then seeing how things are is better than not seeing.
Yeah.
But again, it's very paradoxical because when you see how they are, you recognize how they always have been. And even in your not recognizing it on previous occasions, you still, like you say, you don't recognize it now a lot of the time. And that is so, in other words, it's all very slippery in terms of trying to quantify, seeing versus not seeing. But again, you don't need to, the theory of it is irrelevant. The fact is it is possible to see, so hey, have at it if you like it, You don't need to be dogmatic about, there's no hierarchy, so it's not better. It's like, what's this shit? I just said there's no hierarchy as a way to deconstruct the tendency to think so heavily hierarchical that we tend to do in consensus reality thought. It doesn't make it mean that it's absolutely true, that it's actually like that. No, I mean, you can see when I do this. So obviously I'm selling or giving away. I'm pushing, that hey, it's possible to see this, and it's a really cool thing to do. I recommend it highly. So, you know, you could say that I'm, you know, by my actions, I'm on the side of seeing versus not seeing.
I think it's also a lot like what you're talking about earlier, to get it's that sense of being able to, that your sense of what you're comfortable with. Like in this case, comfortable with that sense that you could space out, you could be focused, you don't really have any control, all of that. Just seeing, wow, okay, cool.
No, you don't. When you space out, you don't lose anything. And when your awareness focuses, you don't gain anything. As you get more and more of a sense of the way this is, you see that it is inalienable. It's inalienably itself. It never gains anything. It never loses anything. So no apparent state threatens anything.
Maybe the two are just stronger. The awareness is stronger and the spacing out is stronger.
Maybe you're just more aware of it. Yeah, maybe you're just more sensitive to it. Yeah. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. That will be our last word for the evening.
But there is no time, so you don't need to